by William Noyes, A Good Christian Woman. 1. Morning. Early mornings, before the sun has shown itself, before the noises have creaked across the wood-planked floorboards of their chambers, I gathered my family round the breakfast table. Nancy is 5 and saying grace for the first time today. Thank you for the stars that light. Thank you for the sun so bright. Thank you for the food you bring. Thank you, God, for everything. She sing-songs the verse I have taught her as our little prince, hungry and impatient, kicks his feet while sitting on his father's knee. In these moments, we are more than names on a list of possessions, more than bodies to be bought and worked. In these moments, we are mother and father, daughter and son, human beings, simply being human. 2, midday. My prince has long been lost at sea, victim of the Barney, helmed by Captain Ezra Lee. Of my babes, 3 have died, 1 remains, 1 enslaved Lord knows where. My young prince lived so honorably as to press upon the heart of his mistress. But Pompey, blind in one eye, half seeing in the other, never bothered with impressions. He secreted himself off in the black of night, only to be caught and brought back. Of all my losses, temperance pained me most. Good, good Tempe. She held to my skirt longer than all my babes. I could not be consoled at the hearing of her death. I wept and wept and wept until at last I slept the sleep of grief. 3, evening. After Jenny's death, Allyn Noyes Chadwick saved her black ivory heart-shaped knitting sheath, and Dr. Richard Noyes kept her small black teapot. Thank you to Carolyn Wakeman for that. Evening. After all these years, they have taken to calling me Old Black Jenny. I suppose to tell me from some temple-curled young white Jenny. I am old, but I am brown. Black is this teapot, gifted to me by Mrs. Noyes. Nancy, my first and last, pours a hot cup. We refresh each other's memories as we sit, me knitting with the aid of this old black sheath, another gift received, some celebration past. I have knit a life, not with needles and sheath, but calloused hands and a sweat-soaked brow, with endless tears and desperate prayers. Though my life has never been my own, I have made the best of it.
This poem was really interesting for me to imagine because we have a very well-known individual from history, a very celebrated individual from history, meeting someone who is all but forgotten. So this is a little bit of information that I had. General George Washington is thought to have rested at slave owner McCurdy's house while traveling from Boston to New York in 1776. Humphrey would have prepared for this distinguished guest. This is some information from Carolyn Wakeman, our historian. This is called When George Met Humphrey. Washington's late September blue-grays questioned the darkness of this slave's eyes. Fury flash-cooled in a deluge of tears turned obsidian, edged in bleached eagle talon. Humphrey's eyes only reflect back Washington's war-weary face. It is safer this way. A slave is all function and no humanity. Whispered assent and dust kicked up when he turns on heel, 2 steps ahead to prepare the way, 2 steps behind in his ordained place. Humphrey is the darkness Washington steps through on his way inside to the warm hearth and smells of roasting mutton and root vegetables. Tonight, Humphrey will bed down in the stable, fresh from a stint on the sea, the delicacy of rat meat and pocketed wild onions pinched between weevil flour biscuits still on his tongue.
It's great to see long-time friends in all the way from Cali, and it's great to see new friends from Connecticut College, and it's great to see everyone in between. Thank you to the Lyman Allyn Art Museum. Thank you, Eileen Donovan, for putting together such a beautiful program. Thank you, Margaret, for the invitation. And I have to thank Marilyn Nelson again for inviting us into this project, and also for making it possible for us to be published in Poetry Magazine, which was actually founded in 1912 in Chicago, and I believe is the oldest poetry magazine in the United States ongoing. So, when I was looking on the Florence Griswold museum site for the history of Lyme, old Lyme in the area, I learned that the people in Lyme used shad, dried shad, and then salted it and shipped it to the West Indies to use for slave food. And actually quite a few items were shipped from Connecticut. Machetes and tools from Collinsville, and so-called slave shoes from Marlborough, and salted shad from Lyme and Old Lyme. I latched onto that fact because my grandfather from the Eastern Shore, his family's from the Eastern Shore of Maryland, loves seafood, and every year one of my aunts would fix shad and shad roe for Easter dinner. So that was my hook, my connection with Jack Howard. Jack Howard was 14 years old when he was willed from father to son. And I want to give a shout out to Josh and Frederick-Douglas Knowles and all the people who took part in the open mic before this. And congratulations to you all, and your great energy does not go unnoticed or unappreciated. The Mathers think they can buy me and pass me along like a bushel of oysters or a clock. They want to dry me out and grind me up, scatter me across their fields like good-for-nothing shad. They hate this bony fish. They think it stinks. They salt it up in barrels and ship it to the West Indies, feed it to people they brand slaves. I say there are no slaves in this house. I'm going to catch shad with my friend Joe. He taught me how to plank it. I'm slipping out tonight, going to see my mother. She knows what to do with shad and shad roe. Some people don't know good eating when they see it. There are good folks here. Family and friends gather around this table. Thank you. This is Marilyn's last poem that I'm going to read. I'm going to ask you to hold your applause, please, and join us as we poets go to the front of the stage, and we will have a call and response. We want to say the names, and we invite you to join us in that closing ritual. Thank you. Before we have our conversation with Adriane. The Last Slave, Samuel Freeman, emancipated November 8th, 1820. You can never tell. People disappeared suddenly in the old days, left rumors and big black gaping holes in family trees, like the ones our ancestors must have left when fate ripped them out of the world they knew. You might have been sold, or you'd run away from despair and gotten lost in the unknown. Was there a difference? Might as well be dead. What happened to the loved ones left behind, holding dripping handfuls of what might have been, was simply fate. They just went on living. They just survived, or didn't. Such is fate. Bought as a child by Captain Joseph Noyes, I served him with respect until he died, and I realized that my fate had changed. For 3 generations, my family had lived with the Noyes as one household, divided by an inherited curse that made some noises and some property. This was the only family I knew. My wife was born and raised in a Noyes home. Dr. Noyes delivered our 2 babies. When I decided to claim my freedom, 5 Noyes testified on my behalf. I was the last slave, because freedom means you have to earn wages and make them stretch from payday to payday for rent, food, clothes, the doctor, when, not if, someone gets sick. It doesn't change the way the brutes see you, but it does change the way you see yourself. And that makes all the difference. I'd been free 6 years when I was viciously attacked for acting proud while black. If I'd fought back, I'd probably be dead now. William Noyes hired a lawyer who sent the brute to jail because our family's fates are intertwined. I'm 65 now. Who could have foreseen that I'd be sitting out here on my porch while the red throat whistlers and black-capped Dickie-Dees celebrate and the cherry petals snow? No more than 30 years ago, who could have foreseen this as my possible fate? A free, white-bearded black man with his wife sunning together beside their front door. looking down their forsythia-lined path. Their son out back hammering a horseshoe in the blacksmith shop. Their daughter humming tunelessly in the kitchen. Their grandsons swearing they'll finish chores before dinner. Their quiet granddaughter dreaming futures. And now we'll say their names. We'll ask you to stand. Say their names. Temperance Still.
Temperance Still.
Louis Luia.
Louis Luia.
Luce.
Luce.
Samuel Freeman.
Samuel Freeman.
Jenny Freeman.
Jenny Freeman.
Cato.
Cato.
Phyllis.
Phyllis.
Nancy Freeman.
Nancy Freeman.
Arabella.
Arabella.
Caesar.
Caesar.
Humphrey.
Humphrey.
Pompey Freeman.
Pompey Freeman.
Jane.
James.
Cruza.
Cruza.
Jack Howard.
Jack Howard.
Thank you. I want to point out what just happened. With a little backstory, very small. I've written also in personas, taking a person who lived in history and saying I, and joining my life to that person's life. So I know something about the process that these poets have gone through. They will never be separate from the people they have written about. And you just started that process. When you breathed in and then breathed out those names, you took them into your body and you sent yourself out into the world to speak their lives through your life and to live in equality and freedom with all people. That's what you just did. Great. I can't thank our poets enough. And there's more. I'm going to introduce Adriane Jefferson, who's going to come up and lead a discussion with our poets about their process, about the poems you've heard, about whatever she does. It's going to be great. But this is Adriane Jefferson, an executive in arts administration and cultural equity with expertise in program design, event and media production, grant making, external affairs, community partnerships, and new program initiatives. Wow. She specializes in professional development programming for young creative professionals, programs that amplify Black, Indigenous, people of color, and social change initiatives. She is a thought leader, advisor, and educator pertaining to issues of justice, diversity, equity, access, and inclusion. She has dedicated her career to creating programs that result in a more equitable, vibrant, and sustainable arts landscape. Adriane is currently the director of the Department of Arts, Culture, and Tourism for the City of New Haven and the executive director of New Haven's Festival, Inc. She has worked professionally in the arts for 18 years, holding prior positions as the executive director of Writers Block, Inc., and as a program manager for the State of Connecticut Office of the Arts. Adriane Jefferson.
I'm guessing this is on. Hello, hi. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm guessing that this is supposed to be in front of me and I'm not supposed to be holding it, but hello. I first want to just say, Wow. Like, can we give another round of applause, please? I am so inspired by you four women. Some of you who I've known for quite a long time, some of whom I'm now just meeting. It is an absolute inspiration to watch the work that you do and have done as accomplished Black women. And we honor you. I honor you for what you do and the path that you have paved. So I would be remiss if I did not say that. Okay? Now I have a lot of questions. I'm trying to get this mic. Like, I don't like the way this is. Hold on. Okay, so I have quite a bit of questions for you all. And I want to start with you, Rhonda. You said this actually when we were sitting down here talking prior to you getting up and reciting that beautiful poetry and doing the recitation. You were talking about giving voice to the voiceless. That this was a task where you had to give voice. What was that process like to give voice to someone who has not been heard before, for someone whose voice has been suppressed? What was that like for you?
Oh, first say, can everybody hear me without the mic? Good. Let me first say that in my process, because I wanted to give honest voice to the voiceless enslaved people that I was writing about, it was a lot of listening for me. It was also a lot of learning. Because of the times where these people lived, and as I said, we didn't see the North as this place, as a place of enslavement. We saw the North as a place where people escaped enslavement. And so it was a whole other learning process. And then, once you understand these things, and then it becomes a challenge to give honest voice to the people who you're giving voice to. When all the words you have are 10, what do? I felt compelled to give honest voice. When I wrote in the voice of a child, I wanted that poem to feel like it was the voice of a child. When I wrote in the voice of his sister, I wanted you to feel her pain, but also the pleasure that she got out of knowing that her brother was finally free. So for me, it was about embodying these enslaved people with all the lack of knowledge that I had, but also a wealth of history, thanks to Carolyn Wakeman and research.
I know we were talking about, it's kind of like method acting. It's a very similar process where you are fully encompassing yourself into that person. I guess a follow-up question is, do you feel you will ever be the same?
I will never be the same. And I don't think any of us will be the same. I do recall saying, I will finish these poems when these people let me go. There are so many others. The town of Old Lyme is laying additional witness stones this summer. And so we understand that just because we've written about 14 doesn't mean there's 14 or 140 times 14 who need to be named and whose voices need to be heard. So yes, they embody me now. And I don't think you can go through this kind of an experience knowing what you're writing about, knowing the history that you're writing about, and then flesh someone out of your body like that. They become a part of you, or for me, they have become a part of who I am.
Well, Antoinette, we're going to go to you next. You said something that was very, very powerful. You said many things that was very powerful. I don't have the exact wording, but what you were referencing is heaven is above us and the rest is hell. I thought that was powerful, and I was wondering if you can speak to how you hope uncovering these stories helps us to shape our future and to reconcile with our future, And also, do you still think we're in a space where we are in hell with some of the things that have been going on to the Black and brown bodies, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor? How does what you said about being in a state of hell resonate with where we are today?
In that particular poem, I was talking about Caesar and looking at the world through Caesar's eyes and Caesar's perspective. He would go out at sea for long, swaths of time and come back having, made no money for himself, tired and weary, and go back out to sea. And I did a lot of research, like what Rhonda was saying. We got a little bit of information about them, and me knowing what it was that he was constantly at sea, I wanted to know what was it like to be, at sea or a deckhand at that particular time. And that's when I learned that, they trapped rats. And that was oftentimes the only meat that they ate, and that they would call it a delicacy. I learned that the flour that was on board was often riddled with these boll weevil-y type situations. And that's where I came up with the weevil bread, because of course you wouldn't throw away what little bit of food that you had, right? You would make use of it. And of course, that the slaves on the ship would always have the worst jobs and the least amount of comfort. And I imagine that, that's hell. Whether you're floating on the water, doing the very worst of everything, eating rats, or if you are on ground, living in the household of your master. And that was something, I'll kind of tie back to what you were talking about the difference in our expectations of what it was like to live up north. Always we thought of that as, you follow the drinking gourd, you get up north and everything is going to be okay. But it wasn't always okay up here. And so I was just kind of tying that together, because he would have had to have lived in the house with his enslavers. We normally think of the slaves being in the slave quarters, which may have been more so the case down south, unless you were a house slave. Well, these people oftentimes lived in the basement or in the attic, which meant that they were constantly under the slave master's gaze, which is extremely problematic. I mean, if you could just even think about living at work. I mean, I love my job, but I wouldn't want to have to live there and be on point 24/7, 365, and sometimes 366 days a year. And these individuals lived in the household, also constantly under that gaze, always afraid to make some type of misstep, right? A misstep could be a physical punishment, or it could mean being sold away or having your family broken up. So when I wrote that line, I just imagined that there was no safe space for Caesar. And so when I did a whole lot of research, I could probably, build and pilot my own boat, right? You actually begin to inhabit all of that and try to really begin to understand it. And I realized that the only time that he might have just a little bit of time to think and reflect would be, during dog watch, that time where everybody else is asleep. What I also learned is that if you learn how to navigate by stars, then you can use that to navigate on ground. And we know that Caesar ran away, got dragged back, and then finally escaped. And I imagine that he figured out how to go by studying the stars. How else would he know where to go? I mean, if I just start walking, I don't know north, south, east, or west. But his time on the ship would have been his education. and subsequently his path to freedom.
You were experiencing during that process.
Well, you know, when I wrote the poem, I of course thought about my little cousins. I guess they're my little grand cousins, and I was also around a little person growing up. It just happened that way, and it really struck me, and I tried to put it in the poem. Just there are these little humans, and they're so full of life, so full of joy and curiosity, and they need constant 24/7 protection. And I try to convey that. You know, so often, especially I think when talking about African American history or the history of Africans kidnapped and enslaved from Africa, you know, we're told, oh, there was no culture, it got totally cut off, no history. And the more I think about it, the more I study, well, I said, of course that's ridiculous. You know, if anyone kidnapped us right now and took us to some other country, we're not going to forget our parents, we're not going to forget what they taught us, we're not going to forget songs, prayers, stories, the food we like. And again, with talking about little children, it's very difficult, but I think the way we talk about history, it's easy to lose sight of the fact that we're talking about individual human beings, grandfathers, grandparents, parents, brothers and sisters, cousins, aunts, uncles, and children, teenagers, babies, toddlers, infants we're talking about. And I think one of the great things about poetry is that we can bring all those details, all those human details into our poems that sometimes can get lost or left out in history documentation, and definitely gets left out of the news reports and the rumors and the stereotypes.
That's actually a perfect segue into my next question, which is around cultural preservation. What we're doing, what they have done, what Margaret has done with the witness stones, it's all about cultural preservation. And it's really important, and I kind of was getting to that earlier, it's really important that we're uncovering these stories because there's so many stories that we do not know, especially as Black Indigenous people. And if we know our history, then we can be, proud. But I'm wondering what role you feel, or what is the significance of cultural preservation, and what role should poetry play in preserving our stories? Yeah, it's for any of you.
Yeah, this is where my heart lives. I always say that literature and the arts undergird and complement the historical record. I have a lot of friends who are historians, and they have a really interesting perspective on everything. Everything has to be quantified, qualified, and you have to have, a multiplicity of sources, or you can't even really kind of talk about it. And I really do respect and am grateful for that type of documentation. But to say that, okay, a child is 3, or that a master has decided to baptize one of his slaves when her former master thought that she wasn't eligible to be baptized, to say that is one thing. but then to step back and actually look at it from the perspective of a 3-year-old. And what you said in your poem was so powerful when you said to imagine a toddler that you love, then you know what a 3-year-old looks like. Then when you know that the 3-year-old has been taken from its mother, it has a different weight than when it's just the facts, Jack, right? And so, to say that some slave masters at a particular time deemed that some slaves were worthy of baptism, which might mean that they could actually go to heaven, and then to see a young woman kind of not even really having agency to say if that's what she wants, if she really believes that that is going to make her be able to have access to heaven, and why is she going to be okay in the next life but she can't be okay here, then it gives us an opportunity to have these complicated and complex questions, because these people were not just automatons walking through this, environment. They were living and breathing people who were thinking and trying to make some type of sense out of their own lives. And so I think you need the music. You need the wail of, a Negro spiritual. You need, the blues trying to make light of the pain still. And you need the poetry to begin to understand truly on the inside, viscerally, what historians are telling us.
I would add to that as we educate ourselves as Black, Indigenous, people of color, as First Nations people, we empower ourselves by the stories we know. It's not just that we, hear a story, remembering that we were not allowed to read and write, and so the story was our history. So what we're doing is using poetry as a history lesson here. I would also say that as America's history often repeats itself, that once we do begin that process of teaching ourselves our history, there is this idea that, and I'm speaking right now about critical race theory, and maybe I shouldn't go there, but I am.
Thank you.
Because we see this pushback of guilt, right? Because people have shame about what their forefathers wrought yesterday. There is shame today that makes people want to shut that down, even though nobody's actually doing that, right? No, there's no critical race theory education happening, and yet we have a group of people who take this, as a way to, drum up renewed hate. Okay, and I really think, since we're talking about what makes the arts help become education, how it reminds us of our history, it doesn't just remind us of our history. It reminds the people who were slave owners of their history. It reminds their lineage of their history. And look, it's not all ugly, but most of it is. Okay? And we have to be honest about what we're doing here when we say we're giving voice to the voiceless. We're giving you knowledge at the same time. We're empowering our own selves at the same time. We're learning at the same time. So it's always relevant when we teach one another through poetry or whatever means that, that we are not only spreading our culture, but revealing other culture. Your final comment, and is that I hope that one day that we not just acknowledge each other's hurts, that we can someday learn to console one another. We are human. We are full of emotions, and we're complicated. We hurt each other, But I think we've reached a time where we need to be able to console one another. We're a diverse society trying to live even more diversely. That requires that we embrace one another.
Something I hear you consistently saying, all three of you, even in your poetry, is around this idea of just being human.
Yes.
Seeing one another as humans, empathizing with each other on a human level, right? And I also think, as I'm listening to you all, what I'm thinking about how important it is to share space with people, share power with people. And I think that's where being uncomfortable with conversations around race and, blackness and whiteness and what that all means is because we have not been taught to share power. And the reason is we're in a world, arts and culture for the last 400 years, and honestly our whole history has been led through a white supremacy culture, right? And we have to be honest about that. And if we can be honest about that, then we can start to heal. Then we can start to reconcile. Then we can talk about using poetry as a tool to activate change. And that's what we're doing here. So it's not to make people uncomfortable, but we have to have honest conversations. And honest conversations are not often happy and comfortable, but eventually, if we can empathize, if we can understand and put each other in each other's shoes, then we can move forward. And so that's what I hear you all so beautifully saying. What I want to, I have a couple more questions before we close, and then I was hoping to open it to the audience and get maybe one or two questions. I want to talk about your experience in working together as poets, as Black women. What was that like? What was the process like for you?
Wow.
Well, we've been working together. It's going on a year and a half, actually, that we've been engaged with this project with Carolyn Wakeman, who's the convener of the Witness Stone's Old Line, and who is the project historian. And I've certainly learned from other people's poetry, but it's also just been good to be together, even on Zoom, which it often is. Because, here, especially in Connecticut, I know we live in different parts of the state, and we're driving, we're commuting, we're all commuting. So we don't actually get a chance to spend much time together. Before this project, we didn't actually see each other that often. And I think that experience might be something that lots of people of color in Connecticut experience. So it's really been wonderful and good. Just that we can be together and talk and laugh. And maybe one day soon we'll be able to share a meal.
So on that note, I want to close with this question before we get maybe one question from the audience, because I know we might be over time. What burdens do you carry as poets, as Black women? Your eyes got really big when I asked that question. Yeah, what burdens do you carry? I think y'all are accomplished, renowned women doing an amazing thing. And for me, I realize even in the work I do, as a woman, as a Black woman, the load that's often thrown on me to carry certain things, to carry certain stories and certain work, right? And then Kate, you saying, I don't often want to even bring that into the space. That's a burden that we've taken on. So what burdens do you carry And what is that like for you? What is that experience like for you?
Well, let's be honest. Our Black femalehood, as we move in this world from day to day, from place to place, it's used in our favor and against us. We're often considered angry, and not as if we don't have a reason to be angry, but that doesn't make us angry, I think we carry that. We carry our children's hearts. We've all talked about, Elisa, Antoinette, and I, and you as well, Adriane, about our children and how that's affected. I remember when my son bought this Cadillac SUV. I was like, I was praying. I'm not gonna lie, because a Black man in a nice car in the wrong neighborhood could be a dead man. This is what we carry. We carry our children on our tongues with prayers, right? We carry our Blackness out with us every day. We carry our femaleness, and the world expecting from us as it has always expected from us, and us always trying to give it what it expects, And so I appreciate your comment, Kate, because sometimes you don't want to deal with it. It's true.
You gonna take that? Kate's like, she's like, no, I'm not thinking that. I think, Rhonda, that you really hit it quite honestly on the head, and big props to you for asking such a provocative question. I think that we do carry the expectations, of the world so much on our shoulders, in the sense that sometimes we're made to feel like we're representative, right? Especially if you're the only woman of color in a room,
Yes.
Or the only one at the table. You feel like if you misspeak or you say the wrong thing or you're misunderstood, then there'll never be another Black person in that space again. And you worry about those types of things. Another burden, I think, that poets, probably all poets, carry is the burden of truth, right? Because when we start to write, the page is not a place where you can easily lie. You can imagine, you can fictionalize, but the truth always spills out on the page. And sometimes I've written and then I've gone back and I've read it, and I can hear my own heartbreak on the page. And then you put it out there in the world and you're vulnerable. And so you can't even armor up because, your poetry has made you so, open and vulnerable, which is why I'm so glad that we had each other through this project, because I think it would have been too much for one person in solitude to deal with. But we got together and we could support and uplift each other as we were going through the pandemic, as we were trying to, still do our work and be our own people in our own lives, and then also take into our bodies and our consciousness these 14 individuals that we so desperately wanted to represent well.
Thank you. Yeah, I definitely, in my cruiser poems, I wanted to communicate that this was an individual with a personality, with an individual personality who was not a saint, who was not perfect, and who was not one-dimensional. And I did draw on a painful situation from my own life to get the image of Cruza waking up in the morning and being still and wanting to that little bit of space and time for herself. And I looked to my own life experience for that image. when my dad was ill with dementia, once he woke up, that was it until he went to sleep, which might not have been to 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. And so I would wake up and I would stay in bed as long as I could while he was still asleep, because I knew it wouldn't end for 12, 14, 16 hours. So I wanted to bring the idea that this was an individual human with her individual experience and her individual personality and response to what she was dealing with.
Well, on that note, I want to thank you for picking up the burden, and thank you for your truth, right, and your honesty, and your inspirational and thought-provoking words, and the time and commitment that you put into this work to bring these narratives to life. We really appreciate you. Thank you so much. Do we have time for like one question from the audience? I know if not, it's okay.
Sure.
Okay, is that fine?
Make a comment later.
Oh, yes, you can make a comment. Oh, yeah. I saw her hand immediately go up. So, yes, please ask your question.
Yes, thank you all. My question is really based upon the research, particularly the poem that you read about the chatfish is so interesting. So I'm just kind of wondering, what was your favorite type of research? What were the most common? How did you research going back? Were you reading articles, newspapers, and if you had a favorite type of, genre where you were looking at to find the stories? Because I think those little details were just my favorite parts of the poems, and like, how did you find those little tidbits to make it come alive for that time when you guys were putting it all together?
I don't know that I have a favorite type of research. It's just drilling down, you know? You have so little to work with to begin with. When you latch onto anything, you have to drill down as deep as you possibly can. One of the things that I learned about Connecticut and Old Lyme in particular was that there was a bona fide plantation right here in Connecticut. In Old Lyme, Salem, which at the time was a part of Old Lyme, with several overseers, maybe 60 or 70 enslaved people. Who knew that? You know, I mean, it's just, you know, I'm from Ohio, and, you know, like I keep saying, I keep going back to this, our idea of slavery lives in the South.
It's so interesting that it started here in Plymouth Rock.
Yes, exactly. You know, and even as, you know, the fugitive slave law, the North participated in that. And did any of you know that Connecticut was the last state in New England to abolish slavery?
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't know that before this research. So we dig deep into, you know, that. I can't say, oh, I'd like to be doing this or this. I was just amazed at what I was able to uncover with, with research.
I learned about, you know, azimuth and all of that, and then I didn't understand it, so I had to go to YouTube to find out what the heck it was. So I listened to a lecture on that. I mean, it's just like being curious and being a nosy kid.
So I'll just mention one thing I learned that was eye-opening for me, that the phrase desirous of her freedom was not a lofty declaration. It was the law. It was legal language that was part of the. It was people did not want to continue to be financially liable for the people they had owned, and so the enslaved person had to publicly declare that they wanted to be free. And it was about money, that language. So that was something that was eye-opening to me.
Okay, one last question. Yes, sir.
First, did anybody drop this thumb drive which I found on the floor?
I'll check in with you after.
It was a great, wonderful panel. And during all your research, did you discover much interaction between Native Americans and slaves? Because the community seemed to be different. The behavior by the rest of the community seemed to be bad uniformly.
I think one of Marilyn's poems points out that, temperance. She was a mulatto. Now, here's another thing I think we all learned, that mulatto meant half black and half native, you know?
Or half white and half native as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I didn't understand I didn't have a clue what that was meaning. When they said mulatto, I thought half black, half white, right? That's what we think today. But in actuality, you were likely half black and half, I've been learning this phrase, First Nations people. And as Kate has pointed out, half black and half white, or half native and half white, you know. But yes, there were a lot of interactions between native people and black people. And just as native people were also enslaved and sold into slavery in the Caribbean. And so there's a deep history of connectedness between the African American community and the community of First Nations people when it comes to enslavement and the results of the arrival of Christopher Columbus. Let me just put it that way.
Yeah. My reference to Jack's friend Joe, who taught him how to plank the shad, is a reference to the indigenous people in the area who fished for shad and planked fish. And I guess that's research I still need to conduct to find out more about that connection between the enslaved people of African descent and the First Nations people in the area.
Anything, Antoinette?
Well, I was just going to say at my college, Capital Community College, we're doing a project called the Black Heritage Project that is looking at the contributions and influences of Black people in Hartford. And we have seen a great confluence between Black slaves and Native Americans, some of them actually serving in the same households, and children that I guess we would now call biracial, being born of these individuals and being absorbed into the Black community, and as some tribes were becoming extinct. So there's a great connection between Black and Indigenous individuals.